that if you're charging a president for what you claim is a crime while he was president, and Congress already looked at it and found him not guilty, that's a whole different story. That's a whole different story. That's why this Judge Pan had to find or create an extreme fiction. Now, I have in front of me the October 16, 2000 memorandum opinion of the Attorney General, a sitting president's amenability to indictment and criminal prosecution. Now, this is very important. I've talked about this in the past. I've used it in the past here, on Fox, on radio, in the driveway, yelling at my neighbors. It was written by Assistant Attorney General, Office of Legal Counsel, Randolph Moss, who wrote it in 2000. And in 2000, the President of the United States was Bill Clinton. But a similar memo was written in 1973 in the Nixon administration. And so this is a memorandum of opinion for the Attorney General from the official Office of Legal Counsel. This is an official government position. And it's not long. It's about 35 pages or so, but it is compelling as hell. And this has been the Bible, pretty much, for U.S. attorneys in every corner of our country. And these new special prosecutor types, special counsel types have adhered to it, except this one. For the first time in half a century, for the first time in American history, we have a prosecutor who has not adhered to this. Now, what do I mean? This document speaks to a sitting president. What are the rules with respect to a sitting president? And they have to draw the intentions of our framers, since they don't specifically say you don't indict a sitting president, but they do specifically say the way to deal with a president who commits high crimes and misdemeanors, among other things, is through impeachment. That is, you can impeach him and remove him from office. This is what President Trump's lawyer was trying to tell this Judge Pan and the panel while he was constantly interrupted with preposterous, hysterical hypotheticals. He said, look, if you impeach a president, convict the president, remove the president from office, which means he can never run for president again, and the constitutional political process has run its course, then yes, you can indict the sitting president if what he has done is related to some criminal act. Not just we don't like him, we don't trust him, the phone call to Ukraine. No. Then and only then can you indict the former president. But that's to be distinguished from a president of the United States who was impeached, but found not guilty by the Senate. Now he's a former president seeking re-election, if you will, to the presidency, and now you indict him. He said, no. Why? Because of what I've been arguing. Because you're placing a burden on a president that is subjective, that can be looked at in hindsight, that can be used for political purposes by a subsequent administration. And we know that prosecutors, many are highly political. Ask former Governor Bob McDonnell about Jack Smith, among others. And that is a terrible danger. We've had a number of terrible dangers unleashed by this administration. Charging, indicting a presidential candidate, the former president, with these bogus charges. That is a massive interference with in the election. Democrat district attorneys in New York City and Atlanta charging a federal candidate, Donald Trump, who's seeking his party's nomination, and subsequently, if he gets it, and he's in a big lead, prosecuting him during the course of the election and while he's president. We have the rogue prosecutor in Washington, D.C., pushing, running to the Supreme Court. Hurry up, you got to make decisions for me because we have a tight deadline. The court says, who the hell do you think you are? No, we don't work that way, Mr. Smith. That's not how we function. Just because you're in a hurry, we make those decisions, not you, the prosecutor. They didn't say that in so many words, but they basically said, your request is not granted. Well, that's what they meant. The issue of Enron obstruction is now at the court because they twisted that law. The Klan statute has never been used against a modern sitting president. The federal contractor statute has been taken completely out of its purpose. And these are the 4 charges. And so we're going to destroy presidential immunity. We're going to destroy the whole notion, the tradition that you don't interfere in an election, 4 bogus charges by a prosecutor in the past who's been effectively condemned by an 8-0 unanimous decision in another political case he brought against the Republican governor of Virginia. But he was charged, he was indicted, he was humiliated. It wasn't 2 years till the Supreme Court heard his case, but his political career had already been destroyed. That's the nature of the beast. So do we really want that to happen when it comes to a president? Apparently the Democrats do. Anything goes. Because they know Republicans don't conduct themselves this way. You know, we have our Bob Barrs, we have our Bill Barrs, we have our, you name it, we have the legal analysts and others. It's, well, we can't do this. The Democrats don't care. When you go to the, towards the end of the decision, that is the memo of 2000, the Clinton lawyers, they wrote, the constitutionally prescribed process of impeachment and removal lies in the hands of duly elected and politically accountable officials. The House and Senate are appropriate institutional actors to consider the competing interests favoring and opposing a decision to subject the president and the nation to a Senate trial and perhaps removal. They are our elected representatives. Congress is structurally designed to consider and reflect the interests of the entire nation. And individual members of Congress must ultimately account for their decision to their constituencies. By contrast, the most important decisions in the process of criminal prosecution will lie in the hands of unaccountable grand and petty jurors, deliberating in secret, perhaps influenced by regional or other concerns not shared by the general polity, guided by a prosecutor who is only indirectly accountable to the public. Plain English. You have now an unelected system, the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury, none of whom are elected, purposely making political decisions that have far-reaching political and constitutional consequences. Unlike impeachment, which is a creation and the nature of impeachment and how we go about impeachments and what the House does and what the Senate does, that the framers created. The framers didn't say, no impeachment. If he commits a crime, then charge him criminally. That's not even in the Constitution. If you believe a president committed a crime, you have to go in front of these political bodies. There were no U.S. attorneys when the Constitution was drafted, adopted, and ratified. There was no Department of Justice. There was no FBI. Theodore Roosevelt created the FBI. There was no FBI. So all this talk about what can and cannot be done is really bizarre to me. Let me give you a footnote that nobody will discuss because they're afraid. Oh, that's a kook. If you actually go to the beginning and look at the Constitution, the president is the executive branch. They spent a lot of time trying to figure out what this executive branch should look like. They didn't want a king. Hell, they just fought a very costly and 8-year revolution against a king. On the other hand, they had also dealt with the Articles of Confederation. They needed a president that had some muscle. So they create these 3 branches, theoretically equal in authority and power, competing against each other. Of course, the Democrats, that's not the way they work. They control the Congress. They fuse their authority with the executive as long as the executive's a Democrat, so they screw up the Constitution completely by design, but that's beside the point. And so they create this president, and it's a balance in many ways. And they create this president, you see, and the point is that the president is the head of the executive branch. So if you're going to remove an elected president, he and his vice president, the only people in our entire government elected by all the people through the Electoral College, but the participation of the entire nation, citizenry of age, not for senators at that time appointed by state legislatures, but not even today, it's per state, and even smaller congressional districts. The president is the only one. And their point is, you can't have unelected prosecutors using grand juries that may be tainted depending on where they're located. Judges and trial juries, again, all unelected, decapitating the executive branch. The effect on the body politic would be horrendous. And that's what's going on right now. And so they're making an excuse. I'm saying this immunity does follow a president. If a president commits an independent act, if a former president commits an independent act that has nothing to do with when he was president of the United States, that's to be looked at differently. And an analysis is done. But it seems black and white, cut and dry to me, that if you're charging a president for what you claim is a crime while he was president, and Congress already looked at it and found him not guilty, that's a whole different story. That's a whole different story. That's why this Judge Pan had to find or create an extreme fiction in order to try and create a legal precedent, a legal foundation for her viewpoint. I'm concerned about this panel because even Judge Henderson isn't the strongest of strongest judges. He's appointed by Bush 41. So this is very important. They say, thus, the constitutional concern, again, written by a man appointed by a Democrat in a Democrat administration, but the OLC is very good regardless. It's not merely that any particular indictment in criminal prosecution of a sitting president would unduly impinge upon his ability to perform his public duties. A more general concern is that permitting such criminal process against a sitting president, I'll get there, would affect the underlying dynamics of our governmental system in profound and necessarily unpredictable ways. By shifting an awesome power to unelected persons lacking an explicit constitutional role vis-a-vis the president, they're not in the Constitution. The Attorney General's not in the Constitution. These lower courts are not in the Constitution. Only the Supreme Court. They were created subsequently by Congress. Given the potentially momentous political consequences for the nation at stake, there is a fundamental structural incompatibility between the ordinary application of the criminal process and the office of the president. Well, Mark, that's the president in the office. And I'm saying it still affects the president in the office. Obama, I need to take out that terrorist. Well, his son's American citizen and so on. I know, but they live in the same place. They're there at the same time. But they're unleashing acts of terrorism against our soldiers and against our people. I've got to take them out. Take them out. That's a presidential decision. That is a presidential decision. Nobody else gets to make that decision in the country. So he leaves office, and you could at least, if the anti-Trumpers win the day, you could at least bring charges against the president for that? The former president for that? You could? And even worse, let's say it's a president that served four years, one term, and he wants to run for re-election. So on top of that, you're going to interfere with the election, and you're going to demand that this prosecution take place in record time? Doesn't that demonstrate the political nature of the whole thing? They went on. They say the following: we have separately reconsidered whether, if the constitutional immunity extended only to criminal prosecution and confinement, but not indictment. That is, you can indict the sitting president, but hold off actually bringing the case until that president leaves office. You know what they said? No. Why? Can you guess why? Because it's hanging over his head while he's president. So he's distracted. It's not like he's going to ignore it and say, all right, well, I'm out of office. He's going to plan for it. He's going to prepare for it. And worse than that, they point out, internationally, he's a pariah. oh, he's been indicted. He might go to prison. We don't need to listen to that guy. His term here is dead. Dead. And you can do this in lieu of or over the top of impeachment. That's their argument. Today, these guys would seem to suggest, no, that's not a good idea. To indict a sitting president and try that sitting president after he leaves office. Is that really that much different than indicting a former president for actions he took as president? Isn't he still going to have to keep looking over his shoulder? Isn't he still going to have to worry about whether a decisive, important decision he makes or one he believes in is going to have a potential criminal impact if he doesn't win re-election or if it's the end of his second term or whatever the case? Of course he is. The president's ability to perform his constitutional functions would be unduly burdened by the mere pendency of an indictment, and I would say fear of a future indictment, against which he would need to defend himself after leaving office. This is key to me. I should argue this damn case.
Want to see more? Sign up for Levin TV.